goes for Manhattan Island or Mumbai, this is our best guess of a warmer future, one where sea levels are gnawing away at the corners of our carefully drawn maps. Coastal cities are first in line for big changes, and some that can afford it are gearing up to spend billions to make sure they survive.
You might think of the great ice sheets in Greenland and Antarctica as giant banks of freezers. And we're running down those rows of freezers, unplugging them.
That's Ben Strauss, CEO and Chief Scientist of Climate Central. They're a nonprofit organization that researches and reports on climate change, including sea level rise. Researchers like Ben have concluded that the world is guaranteed to see 4 feet of sea level rise just based on greenhouse gases we've already put into the atmosphere.
Once we unplug a freezer, it's unplugged. You can't plug it back in, and it's going to melt.
That's pretty scary, especially if you live on a coast. And according to the UN, more than 600 million people live in coastal areas that are less than 30 feet above sea level. And any amount of further emissions will cause sea levels to rise higher, with scientists like Ben expecting a rise of 10 to 20 feet or more. Some coastal areas are already struggling. During some high tides in Miami, water already slides across city streets. This is happening now, and it's a physical sign of rising sea levels.
There are already neighborhoods in the United States that I know about where real estate value has evaporated because floods that used to be rare or non-existent now happen multiple times a year. It's a block here or a block there, but it's really affecting people.
Climate Central created a visualizer called Surging Seas to drive this point home. It shows how coastal cities will fare as the climate heats up. Look at New York, New Orleans, Shanghai, or Lagos, and you'll see how melting ice could push shorelines inland. It's one of a few projects online that are designed to make the threat feel immediate.
I think climate change tends to be such an abstract and distant-seeming problem for most people. We want to make it as real and personal as possible. People being able to look up their own neighborhood, their own home helps to do that.
Here in New York, the sea level is actually rising faster than in lots of other parts of the country. We did a whole video about it. Anyway, earlier this year, the city unveiled an ambitious plan to keep the lower part of Manhattan safe.
I often said after Sandy, you don't find a lot of climate change deniers in New York City.
They plan to fortify the city and may actually build out land into the East River by 50 to 100 feet. It's not the first time that New York has reclaimed land from water, but prior expansions were mostly done to increase living space. This one will be to keep the water away from our living rooms. The plan will cost an estimated $10 billion.
We can't overstate the disruption that it would cause to take no action, so we absolutely have to act.
Janie Bavishi is the director of the Mayor's Office of Resiliency. Her team collaborated on a big study that looked into the climate risks faced by Lower Manhattan.
So we didn't just look at sea level rise and storm surge, but we also looked at intense precipitation and extreme heat. Across the city, we're taking steps to address these multiple hazards and multiple risks that we face from climate change.
For anyone living near the coast, sea level rise presents problems. But for cities, the issues are really unique.
Imagine water pouring into the streets on a regular basis just during high tide. You open your door and you walk into a street filled with water. It would impact underground infrastructure that we rely on. Imagine subway tunnels getting flooded on a regular basis, or the foundations of buildings corroding.
In addition to building out into the river, the city plans to install floodgates at critical places that would flip up in a flood to keep water out of low-lying land. But for now, these plans are still just concepts. They aren't even sure how they'll pay for it yet. But private funding is still on the table.
We're not planning for development, but that also depends on whether or not we're able to get funding from the federal government. We'll have to figure out how to finance this. If funding doesn't come from the federal government, then development might be part of the solution.
Wandering around Lower Manhattan, it's spooky to think about how dramatically climate change could redraw these city blocks. And it's obvious that one threatened area here is driving a lot of the urgency: Wall Street.
So Lower Manhattan is an economic center of the city. 1 in 10 jobs are located in Lower Manhattan. 75% of subway lines go through Lower Manhattan. So we know that we need to protect Lower Manhattan in order to protect the economic vitality of New York City.
But in a lot of places in the U.S. alone, extreme preventative measures like New York's are out of reach. 2 communities, one in Alaska and another in Louisiana, are relocating to get away from rapidly eroding coasts. And a 2018 study found that as many as 311,000 houses in the United States will be vulnerable to chronic flooding by 2045. In other words, climate migration is already a reality. And policymakers here in New York want to avoid the chaos that could come from displacing a city of almost 9 million people.
You can't just pick up and move a city very easily. And because cities are such important concentrations of human lives and economic activity, I think we will invest a great deal in defending them. I don't expect us to be trying to move Manhattan. I expect us to be defending it as vigorously as we can.
We might not have as much time to build out the barricades as you might think. While most projections focus on 2100, it's not like sea levels will wait to 2099 to suddenly attack. Water will trickle in slowly, seeping into our lives and disrupting infrastructure, property values, and coastlines in the process. It won't be sudden, but it will be fast.
It's the speed of change that I think is the most dangerous thing about it. A bullet isn't dangerous if I'm holding it in my hand or throwing it at you. It's the speed of the bullet that makes it dangerous. It's the speed of climate change and sea level rise which are going to make them dangerous.
If you want to learn more about sea level rise, including why it doesn't rise at the same rate in all places, check out our other video. And don't forget to subscribe. Thanks.
Here in Southeast Florida, we are one of the most sea level rise vulnerable places on the earth.
It could be a sunny day, and we could have 2 weeks of a lot of water. And I'm not talking about a puddle here and there.
No one wants to pay increased taxes or fees, but if people want to live here, we have to make these investments to do the infrastructure planning, the pump systems, all the stuff that needs to be done so that we can stay habitable.
I see no way that we could have less than 4.5 feet sea level rise by the end of the century.
I want to go over here to Joey Tomato's dock and see if the lower dock, now it looks like it's gone. I've lived in Florida my whole life. I'm actually a native. And more importantly, I've been on Miami Beach for like 55 years. And I'm a captain. Captains are used to looking at the ocean. I'm kind of like an Indian hunter who's walking through the woods, and he knows that this was a deer that made this or scratched this tree, and he sees a twig broken. Well, that, as a captain, making my living fishing, that is what I do. So it starts out as survival, but if you look at it long enough, and I've had enough time to look at it, you can see small changes turn into big changes over a period of time. It's almost like watching slow motion from one end to the other, and you finally get to that end, and you can see what happened over a long period of time. In Miami, everyone can see this now. If you've been here, well, yesterday, and if you're here today, and you go to West Avenue on Miami Beach, you're going to see water coming out of Biscayne Bay, up the storm sewers, and onto the streets until it's about a foot deep. And that's not fresh water, that's salt water. There's no rain, there's not a cloud in the sky. Everyone can see that. Some people go, oh, we broke a sewer main, or a water main broke. That's not what it is. That's sea level rise.
Miami Beach is a barrier island that is mostly just a few feet above water level. High tides are higher than they were in the past, and the risk of torrential rainstorms has worsened with climate change. All this means problems for Miami Beach infrastructure. Longtime residents have seen dramatic changes over the years.
We're constantly dealing with water all the time. You know, it could be a sunny day, and we could have week, 2 weeks of a lot of water. And I'm not talking about a puddle here and there. Water that spans across West Avenue, where you have to slow your car down or drive to the median in the middle because you think it's a higher level so that you're not ruining your brakes.
Tides move sea levels up and down several feet in the bays every day. But high tides are much higher during full or new moon periods and can be even more extreme when the planets align. Tides will increase even more as sea level rises. Seawalls can provide protection against storm surges and allow the ground level to be built up higher, improving drainage. Ben Moskoff is a business development officer with Shoreline Foundation, a company that builds and installs seawalls. Ben has seen the changes.
The seawall that we're looking at that's now topped by the floodwater is indicative of the height of most of the seawalls on Miami Beach when they were built in the 1920s, because that was the height necessary at that time.
Scientists have been warning about these coming climate changes for years. Dr. Hal Wanless, professor and chair of the Department of Geological Sciences at the University of Miami, has been studying sea level rise for decades. His research provides a clear picture of the evolution of sea levels. He works with various task forces and councils to project sea levels for this century.
The warming we're on track to do is going to be much, much more. The two big things that have been and will affect sea level are the expanding ocean as it warms. That's going to be sort of a linear continuation. We're going to still be transferring heat from the atmosphere to the ocean. That's what global warming is. The second big factor affecting sea level rise now is ice melt. And the ice melt's a totally different game. Ice can melt at rapidly accelerating rates. I videoed this time-lapse footage in Greenland in August of 2013. All of this ice is new water entering the ocean. As these icebergs melt, they add to sea level rise.
South Florida political leaders have adopted a unified sea level rise projection calculated by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. These projections indicate sea levels will rise 3 to 7 inches by 2030 and 9 to 24 inches by 2060. This will mean significant impacts for South Florida.
I see no way that we could have less than 4.5 feet sea level rise by the end of the century. That is the absolute low end. Once you're thinking the reality of those, even the 4.5, our barrier islands are abandoned.
Pete Harlem knows these projections all too well. He is the GIS coordinator at Florida International University and pioneered the precise mapping of sea level rise for South Florida.
Now I'm going to go to 1 foot. On the extreme part of the tide, it can go up plus 1 foot, 1.5 feet on a very extreme tide. So now I'm going to go to 2 feet, and we'll see a bigger change. 2 feet of sea level rise is projected from roughly 2040 to 2060 sometime. And so when we get to that point, we're going to see this as the Miami Beach of that near future. The people out here on the high ground, they'll still be fairly dry. These people will be having all kinds of issues with salt water getting in their yards. Okay, this map shows 3 feet of sea level rise on South Beach. And now we can see that most of the former mangrove swamp was filled to that level. So now I've taken the water level to 4 feet. And now you can see that most of that old mangrove side of the island is completely inundated. And it's just not going to be a place you're going to want to live in a house.
And it's not just people living on barrier islands who need to be concerned about sea level rise. Most of South Florida is susceptible to flooding as infrastructure becomes overwhelmed by rising seas or heavy rainfall. Today, one of the major protections against flooding in South Florida is the intricate system of canals and flood control structures overseen by the South Florida Water Management District, the agency responsible for water resources of nearly 8 million residents who live from Orlando to the Florida Keys. Dr. Jayantha Obi-Sakira is the chief modeler and an expert in South Florida's complicated hydrologic systems.
We have a regional flood control system that was designed and built by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers jointly with the state about 50 years ago. And at that time, sea level rise was not a major factor that they didn't worry about. But now, with the increasing sea level rise we have had in the last 50 to 100 years, some of the infrastructure we have on the coastal belt are basically not working as they were designed. Particularly, there are 3 or 4 structures in Miami-Dade County, northern Miami-Dade County, that are not functioning the way they were designed for.
When we have heavy rainfall, the canals receive and move the excess water. That water is released into the bays and estuaries and eventually into the ocean. The system was designed for the water to flow by gravity, with the water flowing from the higher canal levels to the lower ocean levels. As the sea rises, however, gravity will no longer do the job, so there could be more flooding on the land as the water has nowhere to go.
It isn't just a coastal issue, that drainage and flood control management is very interconnected throughout our communities, and sea level rise has the potential to impact western communities just as much as it does in the coastal environment. In Broward County, we have about 1,800 miles of canals, and drainage and flood control for our communities is provided through a series of control gates and pumps. So when it rains, in order to provide flood control, we have to, in most cases, actively move the water off the landscape. Our ability to do that will be compromised as sea level increases, and there's really no place to discharge the water to without causing flooding somewhere else. Today we have communities where tidal flooding does occur with some regularity as water either overtops seawalls or also moves up through drainage infrastructure.
Another problem related to sea level rise is saltwater intrusion into our drinking water. Intrusion happens when saltwater moves into the freshwater aquifer. As the population of South Florida grows, underground freshwater supplies are being depleted, allowing saltwater to push in through the porous limestone rock. As the sea level rises, this intrusion will happen much faster, pushing saltwater into the freshwater aquifers and canals.
Many municipalities, cities get water supply for the residents from groundwater. And many places, the cities, they have major well fields, basically a well drilled into what is known as the Biscayne Aquifer. It's along the coast. It's about 100 to 200 feet deep, depending on the location. But our geology is such that the rock is very porous. The water would come through this rock, so when the sea level is rising, the water would come faster through these very porous rocks towards these well fields that were constructed years ago and more closer to the coast. So the concern is that this salt water would come near the well fields as the sea level is rising faster. So these well fields are very critical for water supply for the communities along the coast in South Florida.
Beyond impacts to our drinking water, Florida residents will be affected in other ways. In July 2012, Congress made a number of changes to the National Flood Insurance Program, which provides flood insurance to homeowners. These changes are substantially increasing the rates for some policyholders.
What the changes did is that they have limited some of the subsidies that are currently included in national flood insurance for the policyholders. So, for example, the law now says that if you're insuring a second home on the beach through the National Flood Insurance Program, and it's not your primary residence, the federal government's no longer going to subsidize that. And they've also said that if you own a repetitive loss property, which is defined in statute, but typically it's just a property that's had either 2 claims of over $5,000 or claims that have amounted to more than the market value of the property, that we're no longer going to subsidize your policies either. So what we're already starting to see in some ways is that we as a country are realizing that we have to be careful about how we're subsidizing people to live in areas where they're at risk.
Here in Southeast Florida, we are one of the most sea level rise vulnerable places on the earth.
Richard Grosso is the director of the Environmental and Land Use Law Clinic and a professor of law at Nova Southeastern University.
It's been local utility directors, people who run water treatment plants, people who run sewage treatment plants, people who maintain roads, who have been required to institute very expensive retrofits, for example, of stormwater systems. People who have been required to budget big ticket items to keep their stormwater systems, their water treatment plants, their wastewater treatment plants from failing, from leaking, from backing up. This is something they are now dealing with on a daily basis that's impacting this year's budget.
In Miami Beach, residents are already living with impacts. In recent years, increased flooding from high tide and weather events has been a stark wake-up call for people living on South Beach.
I remember people taking pictures and laughing when we saw people canoeing down West Avenue. But then a lot of people started asking questions. Is it safe? Because is the water dirty? Can I walk around on the street even and go back into my apartment and not bring sewage into our homes? So a lot of people, we may not have been galvanized on the issue of sea level rise, but it was really it's scary in a lot of ways that what could actually happen here.
The city of Miami Beach has begun ambitious projects to protect its real property, with a taxable value estimated at $23 billion. The Miami Beach Public Works
coast is crumbling away and the sea has already swallowed up whole rows of houses.
If this negative trend continues and we don't do anything about it, this beach might not be here much longer.
Portugal is desperately trying to fight back in a human struggle against nature. The authorities are replenishing the sand on the beaches and building protective barriers and walls. Citizens are getting politically involved to fight it. But the threat comes ever nearer, striking fear into the hearts of local residents.
The sea flooded into our house. Water was smashing against the walls. Everything was shaking. We were really afraid.
3/4 of the Portuguese population live by the coast. What can they do when the sea becomes their enemy? How are people coping with the threat? And how are the authorities and the government reacting? Vitor Caixeira is a fisherman. For generations, his family have been running a coastal village business in the region of Aveiro, on the Portuguese Atlantic coast. Maria de Fatima, Virgin Mary of Fatima, is the name of the boat Vitor and his colleagues take out to sea. But the fishermen's working conditions are getting worse.
I'm always connected to the sea and have been for a long time. I've been living this life for over 40 years now. I don't do it for the money. You barely earn anything nowadays from fishing. It's about love and passion, but you earn very little.
Today the sea is calm and the wind is mild. Good conditions for the men in their boat. But coastal fishing has become increasingly difficult over the years. Small fishermen barely make a living from their catch. The sea had always guaranteed a modest income. Today, many fishermen live on social transfers and subsidies. And things are getting even more difficult due to climate change, stronger currents and coastal erosion, according to the fishermen from the Maria de Fatima. Torreira Beach still offers plenty of space for Vitor's boat and the fishermen's equipment, but other beaches have already been swallowed up by the sea. After around an hour, Vitor's crew reels in their net. It's a disappointing catch. Only a few mackerel and sardines, and a handful of sea bream and gilt-head bream. The region around Torreira has long been considered a good fishing location. But then the problem started. Vitor can no longer fish where he lives, 30 kilometres up the coast.
There's practically no sandy beach left there anymore. Not even enough room for a beach towel. Now imagine putting a boat here. Fishing in Esmorish, where I live, is on the verge of extinction.
But Vitor doesn't want to give up yet. Along almost the entire western coast of Portugal, the sea is swallowing up sandy beaches and dunes, threatening entire villages. But hardly any other part of the country's coastline is as endangered as Apulia, in the north of Portugal. The development fills fisherman Adriano Ribeiro with dread. Adriano mostly makes a living from squid fishing. The sand dunes still offer some protection, but they're under immense pressure.
Tenho 55 anos. Esta duna, ela estava.
I'm 55 years old.
Ela vinha mais ou menos.
This dune used to be here more or less.
Na altura, esta duna aqui, ela vinha mais ou menos para aqui.
And now look, around 8 meters of sand dunes have disappeared in the last few years. And nobody is doing anything about it. It's just a matter of time before the water reaches the road. It's terrible. With the sea advancing like this, and with sea levels rising, everyone is just talking about defending the coast. There's only one thing we can do: move back, as far as possible. The most important thing to do is to get rid of the stone breakwater over there as quickly as possible. It's one of the government's building measures, and it has made everything worse. The wall is what caused all the erosion in the area. We need to take it out and do something for the dunes so we can protect this place.
Since nobody else was taking action, Adriano and his neighbours have been putting down sand sacks and wooden stakes for years to protect the dunes and houses. A Sisyphean task which doesn't really hold back the sea. On the contrary, more and more houses are falling victim to the high tide, especially in winter. Close by is the food mile of Apulia. Around 30 seafood restaurants are located directly on the coastal road behind the dunes. The restaurant A Cabana is one of them. Fisherman Adriano supplies the restaurant with fish several times a week.
I've brought you some delicious little sardines. They're good and freshly caught. I also have a few sea bass, a few small sea breams, a gilthead bream and a sole, direct from the sea here in Apulia.
But increasingly, Adriano has to listen to the restaurant owner's worries and fears about the future. The sea is threatening to swallow up the food mile. And people are saying that the local city council wants to tear down the restaurants for safety reasons. Yet gastronomy is the cornerstone of the whole region's economy.
It's about jobs, also in the other restaurants in the neighborhood. At least 80 to 100 jobs would be affected. Then there are around 300 jobs that would be indirectly affected. The bakeries, the fishermen, and agriculture.
Restaurant owner Abel Vieira feels let down by the authorities. As an alternative, he's demanding that a new food mile be built further away from the sea. He shows Adriano the spot.
Look, this big plot of land is not being used. It would be the ideal place for new restaurants that could be built higher up, so they still have a view of the sea.
It would be a big project, an ideal solution.
Yes, it would be a good solution for Apulia, and we would all benefit.
But instead of moving, rumours abound that everything should just be demolished. That would mean the end of the livelihoods of Abel Vieira and the other restaurateurs in Apulia, as well as their suppliers. Furadoro Beach, formerly a surfing hotspot, is also getting smaller and smaller by the year, and the surfing is ever trickier. Where there used to be sand and dunes, there are now large blocks of granite to protect the town. João Paulo runs a surf camp in Furadoro and is very worried. Every morning he prepares his equipment. The surfing camp is his greatest passion. He's afraid of losing his sport and his business.
Vivo do turismo e vivo do surf, vivo da paixão que tenho com a água.
I make a living from tourism, from surfing. I live from the passion I have for water and the sea.
A certa forma, na parte económica também vai deixando para trás.
Every day, every year, the advance of the sea is getting worse and it's economically leaving me behind.
Muito procurada, deixa de ser procurada para esse fim.
This used to be a very popular beach. And now people just end up going to other places better for surfing, which is terrifying for me and my staff.
His surf school is still going well. 20 young people have registered for his weekend course. Joao's surfing lessons take place where the beach is still wide enough, around 1 kilometre away from the centre of Furadoro. He has the hassle of transporting all his equipment, and the way there is getting longer. What will happen if the beach disappears completely? Lisbon. Portugal's coastline and the problems of coastal erosion are the responsibility of the central government. Inês Costa, the Secretary of State responsible for the issue in the Environment Ministry, is aware of the problems. For her, protecting the coast is Portugal's biggest environmental policy challenge. Over €1 billion have been spent on the protection of seaside towns and beaches in the last 10 years.
Mais do que a questão estrutural ou a questão de engenharia, não é?
It's about more than hard protective structures. It's about social factors, about people. When I look at pictures from Apulia, I have to say it is very difficult to act. We may have to abandon places like these because the safety of the inhabitants is at stake.
De rebater quando está em causa precisamente a segurança dessas populações.
In the Environmental Ministry, they now know that expensive construction measures are not able to protect all places from the sea. In his hometown of Esmerish, fisherman Vitor is fighting for survival. He's been politically active in his local community for years as a mediator between the town council and the affected residents. Until recently, Carla Santos lived with her children in a house directly behind this wall.
My house was here, directly in front of the sea. This was the entrance. There was one door facing the sea, but we kept it locked. We only used the back door. The sea has gotten more difficult over the years, so I started leaving my house from that way.
That sounds like a dangerous situation.
We didn't have a chance. It was very difficult to pick up the children when the tide was high, especially in the winter. The tides were too big.
Then Vitor, fisherman and politician, accompanies the family to their new home. It's quite close by, just 300 metres inland in a newly built settlement. Carla Santos and her daughters recently moved into this settlement, built by the town council. Vitor accompanied the project from the very beginning.
Desde que vim para aqui, a minha vida mudou muito, porque não chove aqui.
This is our new home. It doesn't rain in.
Temos quartinho para cada tem este quarto.
My daughters now each have their own bedroom, and I have a double room.
Que é o quarto Vitinha, que é dos mais velhos. Também não sabia ter
I would never have thought that I would have a room to myself.
Não tínhamos.
We lived in miserable conditions before.
Tínhamos uma casa e não tínhamos, porque a casa que nós vivíamos era uma miséria mesmo, era daqueles. Aqui temos outra
And
casa
look,
de banho.
the bathroom. Now we have a shower.
No chuveiro, era tudo em bacia.
Back then, we only had a wash basin.
Temos uma casa de banho.
Now, at least we have the basics for my children.
Para estas crianças.
Caparica Beach, a few minutes' drive from Lisbon. We've arranged to meet the Secretary of State from the Environmental Ministry here. Many safety measures have been taken here in recent years.
One thing is certain, the sea level will continue to rise as one of the consequences of climate change. In the 60 years between 1958 and 2018, Portugal lost 13 square kilometers of coastline. That's a lot. We've already lost too much territory to the sea.
Portugal's coastline is under threat. So what is the central government doing about this in concrete terms? One of the most expensive measures is beach nourishment, sucking up sand from the seabed to pour it back onto the beaches.
We gather the sand from offshore, and in general, we don't see it being washed back out to sea, but it does happen. It's a big investment, but it pays off, and it will have a cascading effect, which allows us to mitigate against further coastal erosion.
We can see how beach nourishment looks on the coast of central Portugal. 1 million cubic metres of sand are being sucked up from the seabed and poured onto the beach using giant pipes. It's an expensive solution. The diesel to run the pumps costs hundreds of thousands alone. The works are observed with a critical eye by the population and by Antonio Salguero, village leader of the small seaside town of São Pedro da Gala. He inspects the large building site on the beach daily, offering answers to the sceptical residents.
What if a giant wave comes? The sand will be washed away again.
No, it won't. The tubes will stay here permanently. And when we need to replenish the sand, we'll just move it back here.
Okay, so we are prepared.
Yes, absolutely. Right now you just see sand, but underneath we have submerged biodegradable pipes in 3 layers that are 300 meters long. Next year we are planning to replenish more than 3 million cubic meters, so our beaches always have enough sand.
Tourist resorts in Portugal are doing more and more to prevent the beaches from disappearing into the sea.
If you go that way, you can see what used to be dunes and sand. But now all we have is rocks and nothing else.
Surf instructor João is sceptical and takes his students on an environmental tour of the beach.
Where those rocks are, there used to be dunes a few years ago, with small flowers on them. But all that vegetation was lost with the advance of the sea. The sand the government keeps replenishing here cannot replace the dunes and costs millions of euros. I don't think it's going to work. The sea will continue to advance as the earth gets warmer.
Then João shows his students the damage which occurs almost daily along the beach promenade.
Look at how the sea attacks the stone walls. It's hard to imagine it, but the sea can take away these heavy stones, and then sadly, it could destroy the first line of houses on the beach too.
Coastal erosion has several causes: construction blunders, climate change and population pressures. 3/4 of the Portuguese population lives on the coast, and 1/4 of the Portuguese shoreline is affected by the problem.
Look what I recorded last winter at exactly this same spot. Look at this avenue here. The water is hitting this cafe, destroying the whole terrace. It was just wiped out. And then the telephone booth. Those rocks you see here from the stone wall were swept 30, 40 meters away.
Unbelievable.
Back to Esmeriche, Vitor's hometown, in the final stages of the local election campaign. Vitor is standing as voluntary town councillor for the governing Social Democrats. He speaks to all the residents personally. Supported by the local mayor, he's made coastal erosion the key issue of his election campaign.
Some of the residents we've resettled used to live here. They were seriously affected by the rising sea. Thank God things are better now. We'll keep fighting for you today and tomorrow. One vote per t-shirt. You're the best.
This local election is all about the best concepts to protect the residents and their homes from the sea.
Have you been down here yet?
No, let's go to where our friend Artur lives.
Here on Esmorish Beach, families lived in constant fear, especially in the winter. The central government in Lisbon promised money for resettlement back in the 1980s, but this money never came. So we built the necessary homes ourselves, with money from the local administration. Artur hasn't received a new house yet, but I'm sure he is pleased for his neighbours who have been able to move into new houses.
Yes, I can confirm that.
Artur, have faith.
The election campaign event ends in the social housing settlement Boa Esperança, Good Hope. The residents here are happy that they no longer live behind the crumbling dunes by the sea, but in their new, safer homes. Once again, Carla Santos shows herself as a steadfast follower of the fisherman and local politician Vitor. The mood among the campaigners is more cheerful, but not everyone believes that the problem of coastal erosion can be solved by building new houses.
Step by step, we're finding our way forward. If we win the election, we'll continue our resettlement program and build a new neighborhood right over there.
In Apulia, the mood is considerably more pessimistic than in Esmorish. The news has arrived that the government in Lisbon is serious about tearing down the restaurants on the dunes. The hope is that this will allow the natural dune landscape to gradually recover. Fisherman Adriano feels let down. He now has his own plan to save the village. He asked an architect to draw him a model and has been trying to convince his neighbours for weeks.
Look at this model. Concrete breakwaters should be submerged into the sea around 300 metres from the coast. This would help offset the tides.
Yes, it's about weakening the power of the waves. That would be one possible solution.
Right. My suggestion, that of a humble fisherman who has lived here his whole life. It could only be a benefit for the dunes, but also for the fishermen, the sea flora and fauna, and we fishermen would have more to catch.
Adriano is clinging to his project. He sees an implementation of it soon as the last chance for the fishermen's huts and restaurants of Apulia.
I think it would be a relatively cheap solution, which would avoid wasting money. We have to save this place. Our village has history and potential.
Sometimes Adriano can't hide his anger and disappointment at those in power in Lisbon.
I would agree if the government took measures to protect the dunes. I would agree to anything that is for the good of these communities. But in the meantime, I no longer have faith in it, since all I've heard for 50 years is lip service. I don't understand why the government protects other places but not ours. What's different here from other places?
O que é diferente da nossa comunidade das outras?
Adriano is fighting to save his hometown, but here in Apulia in particular, it seems that humans have lost their fight against nature. Experts say that coastal erosion is an existential threat to Portugal's coast. It's the catastrophe of the century for the country, its people, and their way of life.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Eko EnviroTalk. Thank you for joining us for the 4th edition in the series. The world cities are going under the sea, and it is very, very important for global leaders, individuals, government officials, and researchers to do something to protect coastal cities. Today, we are discussing on a very major, important topic affecting Lagos and also some of the coastal cities around the world. Some 800 million people will be exposed to sea level rise and subsurge. Over 550 cities will be affected if the coastal erosion or the sea level rise increases more than the projected by the world experts. Today, we have experts in the field of ocean, in the field of climate science to discuss and shed more light on these topics. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us. Welcome to Eko EnviroTalk 4.0. Today, we want our participants to introduce themselves. Kindly use the chat box. Let us make it interactive so that we can enjoy the event. Thank you again. You are all welcome. If you are familiar with Lagos and you are also familiar with the Bar Beach, which is a place that most people normally go to in the early 80s. It's a place for tourism and it's a place where people enjoy. However, over the years, due to the activities of erosion, Bar Beach, it's no more. You can see now what is there. There are a lot of things that has been developed over the years due to the activities of. A clear picture of what we are seeing is what happened over the years to the so-called Bar Beach before the state government decided to put a better use to it. What happened in Bar Beach is also happening to other communities around Lagos. This is the initial picture of Alpha Beach in Ibuefo in the Tiosa local government, where a lot of people normally have funds. But over the years, the activity of sea level rise and some such has turned Alpha Beach into something else. The following pictures will show the effects of coastal erosion on communities in Lagos State. This is a documentary evidence of what the impact of coastal erosion is having on communities in Lagos State. Apart from Ibuefo, communities around the Belojuleki are also witnessing this rise in environmental disaster. And it is time for individuals, for governments, and for researchers to put hands together and work to make things work. Most of the investments around Lagos are along the coastal area. The Badagry ports, the Lekki Free ports are all along the coastal environment. And if coastal erosion continues the way it's going, it will have economic, social, and disaster to people there. So today, we want to x-ray this threat that is not only to people, but also to the economy of the fast mega growing city called Lagos. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. You're all welcome.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You're welcome to this edition of Eko EnviroTalk lecture series. Our dialogue today is focusing on the impact of sea level rise and coastal erosion on Lagos communities, the way forward. And it's my pleasure to be moderating this show, Jet Toward Achieving Environmental Sustainability in Lagos. Cities are slipping away into the ocean. Beaches are being washed away. question is, are you even aware this is happening? Sea levels are expected to rise by more than 76 centimeters around the world before the end of this century, but the rise is expected faster in West Africa than the global average. Coastal areas of West Africa is host to about 1/3 of the continent's population and generates 56% of its GDP. Nearly 130 million more people could be exposed to severe riverine and or coastal flooding driven by rising sea level and intense rainfall events which could breach existing defenses. It's now evident that existing structures to defend us against sea level rise are no longer adequate. Therefore, we need to begin to contextualize response plans for affected communities, particularly African cities. I'm Wande Seriki, a climate change and sustainability professional, passionate about designing holistic pathways for green growth in Africa. One of the numerous ways I believe this should be done is by bridging the knowledge gap between human development and sustainable environment, thereby creating opportunities for the alternative or best case scenarios to be adopted. Please go ahead and introduce yourselves in the chat box menu. It will be an absolute delight to meet you. Introduce your organization that you are affiliated with. Thank you for joining. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce the lead speaker for today, Dr. Regina Folorenshaw. She's a director in the Marine Meteorology and Climate Department of the Nigerian Institute for Oceanography and Marine Research. She has a PhD in geography from University of Lagos with specialty in methodology and oceanography. With over 25 years experience in meth oceans processes, coastal erosion, and lagoon dynamics, she's the recipient of 2 awards, an award for commitment and exceptional service from National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and the other for sustainable environmental management in 2017 from the Science and Technology Department of South Africa. She's been part of numerous coastal studies, oceanographic survey cruises for various organizations, and environmental impact assessment studies. She has published over 25 scientific papers on coastal and marine processes. Currently, she is the national focal point for Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO, the United Nations body responsible for global ocean science and services, of the focal point for Nigeria National Ocean Decade Committee for the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. You're welcome, Ma.
Thank you very much.
You can go ahead with your presentation, Ma.
Oh, okay. Yes. Okay. Good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you can hear me and my presentation is on. The talk today is on the impact of sea level rise and coastal erosion on Lagos communities. The outline will be as this. Let me see. Let me get it. Okay, yes. Okay. So first of all, we'll look at some introduction on sea level rise. Then I'll talk a bit on the coastal profile of Lagos. We'll look at the geology, the offshore geology, the nearshore geology, the coastal processes affecting the coastal environment of Lagos. Look at the beach types we have, and then the impact on the communities. Sea level rise reflects changes in the global ocean volume. Higher sea level means the ocean volume has increased. And this is done in 2 ways globally. The ice is melting on most of the Antarctic, Arctic, most of the mountains, the ice is melting because of warmer temperatures. Therefore, we have to be aware that we do not have situations as normal. Now, the important thing we have to bear in mind is our coastline. The coastline is the most important area in every country. The coastline determines our territorial seas, our extended continental shelf, our EEZ, that is our exclusive economic zone, and our contiguous zones. The coastline is where we measure all these things. So if we have to perform any activity offshore, we have to know our coastline and measure from there to the southwards to determine these various important areas where future activities, future economic activities will be taking place. Our shorelines are shifting, meaning our coastline is shifting inland, and that is not very good. Whatever we have to do to protect our shorelines, our coastline, we have to find ways and means to do it. Because when we have increase in levels of water, it will destruct or it will destroy our coastline. It will impact on our socioeconomic activities. Our vegetation will be lost, communities will be displaced, and their economic activities will be lost. So we have to be very careful in terms of our coastline. For the science of sea level, for everything we have to do, we have to think about the science. Is it true or it is not true? The ice front where the glaciers calved into the sea receded more than 40 kilometers between 1850 and 2006. Between 1850 and 1964, it retreated at the rate of 0.3 kilometers per year. Currently, the rate of recede is 3 kilometers per year. All the ice sheets in Greenland, Antarctica, Arctic, and other parts have become very sensitive to global warming and change. Satellites are providing a remarkable suite of tools to provide scientists with extraordinary detailed view of how the ice sheets are thickening. For example, this picture on my left shows the years, and now 2022, but for 2025, you can see that the shift, the ice has melted. The sheet of ice that we used to have is no longer the same. Estimates for the 20th century sea level rise show that global average sea level rose at a rate of 1.7 millimeters per year. The global average rise from 1990 to 2100 for the 6th special report on emission scenario is between 0.25 to 0.45 meters by the end of the 21st century. So you can see that all the models that were used in calculating this global sea level rise averages, they are all in line. There is no outlier. They are all in line, meaning the different models, they all agree on what the sea levels are doing. So we have different tide gauges that have been used to calculate, for example, in different areas, and they all show that the sea levels are rising. This is Brest, this is Amsterdam, and the sea levels are rising. If you put a trend line on it, the trend line will move northwards, meaning the sea levels are rising. Even using satellite altimeters, it gives us the same fact that sea levels are rising all over the world. In Lagos, when we used to have a tide gauge, we were consistently measuring the water levels. And the water levels, when we put a trend line, that is from 1992 and 1996, the trend line shows that our water levels were rising. And when we have dramatic water level, it is represented by the spike in the reading of our tide table. This is when we had a storm surge. A storm surge indicates that sea levels have risen and they come in a form of a surge. And this is represented on the tidal record by spikes, as you can see here. So extreme sea level rise events, that is when storm surges are recorded. Between the months of October 1992, June 1994, August 19, and August 9, these are the months that are associated with storm surges in Lagos. Let us understand the physical characteristics of Lagos. Lagos is a maritime environment which is contiguous to the Atlantic Ocean. The area is 3,577 square kilometers. 21% of this whole total area are the lagoon and waterways. We have three major lagoons, the Lagos, Ekpe, and Yelwa, which is fed by two rivers, which is Ogun and Osun. Lagos is low-lying, that is between 0 and 3 meters above sea level. Water is everywhere in Lagos. Water is introduced into the land through storm surges, through tidal flooding, through shoreline erosion, through groundwater, and also through rivers. As you can see from this map, the coastal environment, this red portion indicates the built-up area and where population is more dense. And the coastal area here is densely populated. I think another map will also show the same thing. I'll come to that later. The nearshore geology. Lagos State lies within the poorly sorted coastal sedimentary plain sands, which are recent alluvial deposits of Nigeria. The sedimentary plain consists of littoral and lagoon sediments of the coastal belt. The lagoon sediment, those are sediments, the sand that comes in through the rivers into the lagoon and to the estuary, and then taken into the sea by the process of littoral drift. These sediments are underlain by the tertiary Ilaro formation, which consists of clay and shale. Sediment is supplied to the coast by rivers, deposited in lagoons and littoral drift. So if sediments are mined in rivers, then it means that no sediment will come to the coastline. The vulnerable sediment characteristics are fine-grained, porous. Now with the topography, which is low-lying, it means that the sediments, since they are not compact, will easily be washed away. So the aquifers of Lagos is such that they are readily recharged by rainfall, intense rainfall, or by storm surge where saline water intrudes. The offshore geology must be taken note of. The very important feature of the offshore geology is the Avon Canyon. It is the largest canyon in the Gulf of Guinea shelf, and it lies between this longitude. The deepest part of the canyon, the deepest part of the canyon is over 800 meters. That was by Awoshika 1995. The widest part of the canyon is within the outer shelf, and it's over 5 kilometers wide. Large volumes of sediments, approximately 1 million cubic meters, transported across the Lagos area, as well as those brought by the Longshore Drift. So now we have to take note of where the canyon is. You see, the near shore of the Lagos sea environment is 440 meters. But when you get to the mouth of the canyon, it goes very deep to 200 meters. But the deepest portion is over 800 meters. And this whole Avon Canyon is very close to the Lekki Orimedu area. We have to understand the longshore currents and the way sediments are transported. The waves are predominantly two types, that is the plunging and the spilling. And the average wave heights are between 1 and 2 meters along the coast. Water and sediments are transported in a zigzag pattern as waves and currents approach the shoreline. Energy created from the breaking waves allows for weak currents to carry large amounts of coarse-grained sediments down the shoreline. You can test this. So if we have the wave break here and the wave goes out, goes onto the shore and it comes back into the ocean, it goes again in a zigzag way. But you see, for us to test the amount of sediment, if you put a sieve where the wave is breaking here, the sieve will collect and sieve out the sand. Then you will have an understanding of the amount of sand that the waves are carrying. So these weak currents are known as the longshore currents, and they carry water and sediment parallel to the shoreline towards the downstream side. So if you are facing the ocean, the sand, the water will be carried towards your left-hand side. So any structure that blocks the longshore littoral drift, as well as the different structures block the longshore littoral drift. So anything that is on the beach will block this process and also cause the waves to diffract. That is when the wave hits any structure on the beach, it will go another direction, come back with the oncoming wave and become more intensified to come and break on the shoreline. Our social demographic pattern of Lagos environment is this. Now, the urban area adjacent to the shoreline are associated with large and growing concentrations of human population and socio-economic activities. Population as at 1991 was 5.7 million, with a density of 1,000.54 people per square kilometers. Then in 2006, the population grew to 17.6 million, with a population density of 2,519.85 people per square meters. Now, let's look at this map. Where is the concentration of population? It is now coming on along the shoreline and towards this Lagos Lagoon. This is our population concentration, apart from this area of Ikeja environment. The shoreline is now the most suitable place that people want to stay. So per the growth rate of 6% and 8%, by the year 2025, Lagos will be among the 3 largest mega cities in the world with a population of 24.5 million. Now we look at the beach types and their characteristics. So I'm giving you 2 aerial photo view of the entire Lagos coastline. One is on the west, which is the Badagry Barrier Lagoon Beach, and the other one is east of Remedial Eko Environment. This is the Akodo Beach. And this beach, the Badagry Beach, is relatively undisturbed. Any obstacle on this beach results in minimum erosion. As a matter of time, with time, the littoral drift and the sand that is coming from the longshore drift covers whatever obstacle that is placed on this particular beach. This beach has this serene environment, and you will not see any relic of any erosion on this portion of the beach. The Akando Beach, that is east of Agondo and Eleko Beach and all that, it looks serene, but it is very, very dangerous in terms of being erosive. Any obstruction on this beach will result in instant erosion. We will see that as we go along. So let me describe to you the Agaja Beach. The Agaja Beach is very near the Badagry Beach. And in 1998, there was 2 vessels that beached on the beach. And any vessel on the beach can be regarded as an obstruction to the longshore drift, the littoral drift, which is a natural process on these beaches. Now, this vessel that beached, there was a lot of concern because of what we have read in literature. So the Nigerian Institute for Oceanography, they were commissioned to go to take records of what was going to happen, that is with time. So here we have the vessel that was beached. We had people who started cutting the vessel because of the concern. And we will see that this vessel was like a groin on the beach because it was a wreck. So the measured beach was the measured beach was 29 meters. And that measured beach from the shoreline and from the waterfront, we saw that sand started accumulating. Unlike other beaches where you will see erosive activities, this area, sand was accumulating because that is the direction of the littoral drift. Sand moves from the west to the east. So on the Badagry environment, beaches propagate towards the sea and also inland. So the line of accretion was increasing by the year. Now, by the time we got to the year 2005, you cannot see any relic. The relic, as at now, has been covered by the sea, and there is no erosive or erosion down drift any longer. This is the Lighthouse Beach. The Lighthouse Beach, 1995, was this accreting beach, very fine, serene. 2010 is the same story. If you go there right now, it is the same story. Even though there has been vessel that has beached on this part of the beach, you can see the mast of one of the vessel that beached there, but it has all been covered up by the moving sand that's coming from the west to the east. So this beach is an accreting beach, and the accretion propagates from the west to the east. Now we come to the Bar Beach environment. Bar Beach used to be the same as the Lighthouse Beach when it comes to the southward extent. And because this place is an estuary, that is the Lagos Lagoon brings in water to the ocean through this mouth, it was decided that this would be a very nice way to have a natural harbor, a protective harbor. Now, to do that, this whole concept was in the 1890s. So to do that, they had to construct protective points to protect the mouth of the channel so that it will not be silted by the longshore drift that is coming this way to the Victoria Island. Because if they allow the entrance to be silted, then a vessel will be grounded at the entrance of this estuary. So what they did was to construct 3 series of groins. One we call the west groin, then the central groin, then we have the east groin. Now, the need for this second one was to ensure that any sand that escapes this groin will be trapped by a channel safe for vessels to go to the harbor. Then we have the east groin. Now, when that happened, the natural process was stopped. The natural process of getting sand to be transported from the west to the east was stopped because of this entrance. So what happened was this place became starved of sand, of the natural sand that was supposed to get to the Victoria Island beach. So eventually, the picture on my right shows, eventually, while this beach, Lighthouse Beach, was accreting, this was fast eroding and became one of the fastest eroding beach by the year 1995, 96. It was one of the fastest eroding beach, and it was known as the hotspot of erosion in Nigeria. East of Bar Beach, we have the Elegushi Beach. Elegushi Beach was supposed to be better than Bar Beach. But because of the process of erosion on the Bar Beach, and because the Bar Beach had now been transformed into Eko Atlantic Beach, a private-owned beach where a great wall has been built, the Elegushi Beach started having serious erosion. So what they thought of doing very fast was to construct series of groins at Elegushi. And when that was done, the normal process of erosion started at Elegushi. So you see that on the downdrift side of every groin, there was an indentation in the beach front. So if they constructed 20 protective these groins, if they constructed 20, it means that they'll have 20 scalloping features on the beach. Now, when you see this aerially, you'll start wondering, oh, okay, it is okay. It is protected. I decided to take a trip to the Elegushi. Now, when these groins were put in place, there was a private property owner who thought that, oh, the beach was safe and started constructing these high-rising structures very fast. However, we found out that it was a big mistake because it was situated in between the crest, in between the indentation. If it had been on, the area of the groin around this area, it would have been a bit safe because when waves approach, when waves approach and hit the end of the groin, the waves diffract, the waves move away and come in with a succeeding wave, which becomes more intensified to hit the coast and indent the coastal area. So this structure that was placed in a very wrong way, and the whole of the front is now seriously eroded. I took the picture from a far off place so you can't see it. But if you go there, you'll see that they had to use a lot of sandbags to protect the front of these high-rising structures. All these places, they had to put sandbags. They used huge sandbags and filled it with sand, hoping it would protect this structure, but it will not protect the structure. This structure will be seriously impacted by erosion. Alpha Beach. Alpha Beach 2006 is a place that everybody would love to go. I was there. That was me then. And, you know, it's a place to sit and look out to see. You have coconut, fresh coconut to take. And when I was taking this picture, even though the place was naturally eroding, I was taking this picture and a friend of mine was also taking a photograph of me taking photographs. And you can see that Alpha Beach had coconut trees on the beach front. It had a tarred road. It had houses. It had houses, you know, behind or in front of the road. It had electrical poles. Then in 2010, a vessel beached. That is, there was a vessel that just beached on the beach, and it became like a groin. And when anything beached on if you put timber on this beach or a vessel on this beach, the downdrift side is going to erode, the updrift side is going to gather some form of sediment. So when this happened, when this vessel beached on the beach, you'll see that the coconut area here started pulling out because this was the area on the downdrift side. The vessel is around this area. So this place started accreting while this place started indenting, and all these coconut trees were pulled down. So by 2012, Alpha Beach, the road was even, you know, being removed. The ocean or the sea was cracking the road, which was paved before. All the electrical poles were pulled down. Now, when the issue became severe, they thought that they could introduce series of groins. But this is the wrongest, if you will excuse me to say, move that was put in place. Because when you put in any groin, it will serve as the vessel that beached, and the downdrift side will erode very fast, while the updrift side will accrete a bit. So this area, you see that it is not as bad as this area that, you know, the waves are pushing through. And very soon, this whole area will be eroded, while the sand here will retain, you know, their position, because the waves hit the mouth and go 30 degrees to hit the land and start indenting the land. So we are going to have a series of indentation on the coastline. When you go closer to where there are houses, this is what you find. You find communities, individual people in the communities now trying to protect their property on the land. This was done by someone else. I don't know, we don't know who started this whole thing, but the community now starting having problems trying to protect their property on the shoreline. Here is Lekki Free Port. It's called the Dangote Jetty. And I am terming it the birth of another Bar Beach project. Because Lekki Freeport now has a groin that extends into the sea, just to protect the entrance for the vessel to come in, just like we saw in the Bar Beach. And there is another groin that is placed just to ensure that whatever sediment is coming is also protected. from entering the channel. I don't know the name of the channel. So let's say the Dangote channel. That goes to the Dangote port. Now, you can see the beginning of erosion here. This is an indentation. So when you go far behind and you take a picture of this beach, you see that the indentation is becoming, more visible, more severe. Now, these are fishing communities that were displaced where they were because of the construction of the Lekki Freeport. So they had to come to the downdrift side for their fishing activity. This is the downdrift side of this whole construction. And they are going to be not very safe. Very soon, they will not be able to continue with their activity. Now, when you go and take a close shot of what is happening on the downdrift side, you see that the coconut trees have become less. All these coconut trees will pull down. The beach front, you see, it has become very steep because when the waves become intensive, they come and take off the front of this beach sand, take it away. So this is the beginning of another bad beach, another hotspot of erosion. Let's look at the causes of erosion. First of all, I have established the fact that coastal erosion is the result of deficit in sand coming to the beach. And it could be due to natural process or due to man. We know that coastal erosion is ravaging large areas of the Lagos coast. The Bar Beach and Lekki beaches are now the hotspots with new emerging ones downdrift. Anthropogenic activities that are responsible for most of the erosion and natural ones are now cited on this table we have here. So for natural causes of erosion, we have wind. Wind can carry a lot of sand, but its importance in erosion is low. Then we have waves. Waves, when it is in its intensity, can carry large volumes of sand. As a matter of fact, when waves are intense, that is when it coincides with astronomical high tides or stuff like that, it can take away like 0.5 meters of shoreline. All the sand within that space will be gone. Littoral drift, they are constantly in place because they are the natural factor distributing sediments from one area going zigzag. So they are very important as a natural process in causing erosion. The shelf width. If the shelf width is very broad, is very flat, it is difficult for waves to carry sand away. For example, when you go to the Niger Delta, the beach front in the Niger Delta, there is a high rate of erosion there that is between 10 and 20 meters a year, but it's not as terrible as that of the Lagos environment with a very high beam crest and beach front. Now, the submarine canyon. In Lagos, I have talked about the Avon Canyon. It is low, but if it is disturbed, it becomes high. What do I mean by that? Because the mouth of the canyon has a lot of sand. But if we have vessels going to dredge the sand from there, it means that more sand from the Lagos coastline will have to quickly go to replace the one that has been sucked from the mouth of the canyon. Sediment characteristics, they are not so high in terms of its importance in causing erosion. Storm surges, they are very high because for a storm surge in a day, a lot of sand can be carried away. A beachfront that is sandy can become stony when all the sand is backed off. Inlets, into a beach, like the Commodore Channel in Bar Beach, they are low in terms of its importance in the scheme of causing erosion. Now, when you come to anthropogenic causes of erosion, climate change, sea level, now we are in the era where the seas are rising tremendously. So it is very high in causing erosion. Subsidence. Anything you put on the beach will subside. It will go down because of the characteristics of the sediment. The sediments are not compact. So whatever you place on that beach will sink. So it also adds up to the rates of erosion. Then vegetation is low. So as a matter of fact, even if you plant grass on the sand and all that, it's not going to really help. It's going to stabilize some form of sand, but it is not going to cause serious erosion. It's low. It's not. It helps. Having coconut trees on the beach helps to keep the sand compact and not easily eroded. But when a groin is introduced, the coconut tree will be pulled down. Vegetation will be washed off. That the cheap way of getting truckloads of sand is going to the beach and packing it. That helps to increase the rates of erosion. Harbor protecting structures like what I described in the Bar Beach, the Commodore Channel, that causes high rates of erosion on the downdrift side. And then shipwreck, also they are a form of groins or obstruction to the natural littoral drift. So they are very high when it comes to causing erosion. Now let's look at some of the remedial measures that has been applied in the Bar Beach. It is important to look back and see whether all the things that were applied, between the 1958, there was a construction of a groin at the foot of the east mole to avoid the undercutting of the mole by erosion. It did not work. Between 1958 and 1960, they dumped a lot of fine sand dredged from the Commodore Channel at the extremity of the east mole for dispersal along the beach by waves. That is, they were trying to help the natural process of waves carrying the sand downdrift. It did not. All the sand they packed there was gone. Between 1961 and 1968, there was a permanent pumping station that was built at the inner harbor near the east mole to supply an average of 0.66 million cubic meter per annum. The zigzag process carried it all away because it was running. So, the waves need a lot of sand. Then between 1969 and 1974, some artificial sand replenishment by reliable records of quantities or frequency was made available. Now, because the other sand that was pumped there was an argument. There was some group of experts that thought that the sediment particles were not right. We have to get the right sediment particles so that they can be able to stabilize the beach. So they now came up with what will stabilize the beach. So with that understanding, between 1974 and 1975, 3 million cubic meters of sand was dumped and spread on the Bar Beach. It was washed away. In 1984, 2 million cubic meters of sand was dumped and spread on the Bar Beach. It went away in 1 year because in 1985 to 1986, there was need for 3 million cubic meters of coarse-grained sand to be dumped and spread on the beach from a burrow pit located 13 kilometers offshore. That amount of sand was also gone. 1990 to 1991, 4 million cubic meters of quartz-grained sand was also dumped and spread on the beach using the trailing hopper dredgers from Bureau pits located 30 nautical miles offshore. That did not last. It was gone. Between 1995 and 1997, 6 million cubic meters, that is 2 million cubic meters per year, was dumped and spread on the same beach. It was gone. The year after, tea groins, that is a rock, concrete that looks like tea, groins of rubbles were placed on the beach because the school, the Federal College of Fisheries school, was directly on the line and the waves were breaking on its fence. So the Japanese government came to protect their property because they constructed that school for Nigeria. So they built this tea groins rubbles to place there for protecting the school premises. That did not help very much. Between 1999 and 2000, 2 million cubic meters of sand was dredged from nearby offshore Bureau pits and also placed. I think at that point, the government knew that they were fighting an impossible, or they were on an uphill task that was going to not result in any good thing, because all these years they've been sand filling the place and it has not helped. So the concept of Eko Atlantic coming to build the Great Wall, sand fill using the Dutch process to put groins, add filters, and then have the Great Wall, sand filling the place and building a fantastic private housing scheme was conceived. Now, let us understand the Commodore Channel. What happens when there is a storm surge? You see, what I'm showing you here is a jetty. And everybody knows that when a jetty is built, there is a space between the jetty and the water level. When we have a storm surge, if a vessel is not careful, it will crash into the jetty. Because this is water over a jetty. It is not just water. There is a jetty here. You can see the edge of the jetty, but there was so much water. This is the force in a channel when there is a storm surge. And this thing happened between the 24th and 29th of August. The big boulders that were used to open the jetty was pushed by this storm surge onto land. So the severity of water levels, you can see it now. There is a jetty there, and it is amazing when we talk about rising water levels. So what are the impacts, sea level rise impacts on coastal communities? There will be large-scale inundation, exacerbation of the coastal erosion and saltwater intrusion into aquifers. That is, I don't have the picture here, but when you go to all these local communities, you see that their domestic water sources are very close to their house, and their house is very close to the shoreline. So whenever there is a storm surge or there are high water levels, the seawater flows directly into their domestic water source, which is shallow wells. There will be loss of ecotones. There will be loss of subsistence of the local communities. For example, in Okwaja, all the coconut trees that were lined up there used to serve as a source of income. When the coconuts are pruned down, they are sold and they are used. The coconut oil is also used as for skincare. All these things have washed off. There will be increased frequency of ocean storm surges. And even in channels, the storm surges are going to be pulling down structures that are lined up on the edge of the channel, not only the coastline, but even in estuaries, by the edge of these lagoons, the structures there are going to be pulled down. The road near those structures are going to be washed off. So changes in ocean dynamics, which could have effect on fisheries resources. How will it have effect on fisheries resources? The communities of the fish dwellers, the fishermen, are going to be impacted. They will not have a safe place to tie their canoes. They will be migrating from one place to the other. That will affect the general fisheries. That is the fish that individuals depend on for nutrients. Coastal communities should be prepared to adapt to future changes. They should be told the truth that the sea levels have risen. The sea levels are rising. The sea levels are going to be beyond their imagination, so they have to find an alternative place to live because they can't continue to stay near the shoreline where their houses are being demolished by the storms, and they are still finding ways of staying there because it is going to impact on their activity and everything about them. Landlords, building and infrastructures, even in developed areas, in high real estate areas, buildings are going to be pulled down. It will destabilize socioeconomic activities. The flora and the fauna will be impacted. Fisheries, especially aquaculture ponds, will be taken over by saline water. Potable water will be impacted because along the whole of the Nigerian coastline, there are no pipe-borne waters. Everybody is depending on shallow wells for potable water, and the seas are rising and entering all these shallow wells. Even boreholes are being salinized, which will impact on the health of the people. Now, then we have to start thinking of, okay, what can we do to stop it, the coastline? What can we do to protect the coastline? Don't forget that I told you that everything you put on this beach, especially from the bar beach environment down, anything you put there to protect it, be it concrete, be it sandbags, it will sink. When you put concrete on it, it will serve as a groin and erode more places. So we do not really have an option to put hard structures like groins in place, or breakwaters, or revetments, even wooden breakwaters. We cannot put anything on that beach. We just have to leave the beach to be natural, to be in its natural form. Then the beaches will erode, but not at an astronomical speed. What we can do is to continue with nourishing the beach. But I know, as I have showed you before, that it is so expensive. It means that every 2 years, we have to nourish the beach with sand. That will be beyond us. Now, the story is not only in Nigeria. The whole of West Africa is being affected. In Lomé, the harbor, the Lomé harbor, has caused the beach downdraft to be eroding very fast. In Cotonou, the beach after the Cotonou harbor is eroding very fast, and a lot of houses have already been pulled into the ocean. In Temagana, it's kind of almost natural, but it is also impacting and affecting the Keta environment. So the story is the whole of West Africa. Why is it the whole of West Africa? The whole of West Africa, from Côte d'Ivoire to the Niger Delta environment, is a barrier lagoon system. meaning that we have the sea in front, behind it is the lagoon. Meaning that from Côte d'Ivoire, you can decide to be in a speedboat and come all the way in the different water ways of the lagoons and get to Lagos. It is the same system. So Lagos should not only be interested in the coastline of Lagos, but should be interested in what is being done in Benin, Republic of Benin. Because whatever, if they adopt any heavy construction on their beach, it will reduce the amount of sediment that is coming down to the boundary and to the lighthouse environment. So, do we continue with beach sand mining? I say a big no. Because depletion of scarce sand on the beach is not what we need right now. We can't continue extracting water. We have to have some policies to stop the digging of wells or construction of wells and boreholes. Okay, let me share the screen again from where I was. Yes, so we cannot continue with mining sand from the beach. Having truck take off sand from the beach is a no. We cannot encourage homes to extract water by constructing shallow wells or boreholes because it will cause the shoreline environment to subside. And when it subsides, any increase in seawater will take a chunk of the land because the land will become lower and the sea can come inland. So, in conclusion, the state of Lagos experiencing managing and protecting its inhabitants, resources, and infrastructure has been based on relatively stable historic climate scenarios. Sea levels have changed now. Adaptation to sea level rise requires action from a range of decision makers, be it state, local governments, private sectors, non-governmental organizations, and community groups. There is no need to plan for adaptation to the unavoidable and inevitable adverse impact of sea levels. We have to tell the people the truth about sea level rise, what is happening, and what is ahead of us, so that everybody will be well prepared. Thank you for listening. So that's my presentation.
Thank you very much, Ma. Thank you for the presentation. I think all the participants and everybody present can testify to the wealth of knowledge and the depth research and the historical perspective On behalf of everybody, we want to thank you for having the time to share the research and the knowledge you acquired over the years on climate change and sea level rise and coastal erosion in Lagos State. We are very grateful for the work. Just for me to do a little recap on what Madam have been able to do in 1 hour. You know, it's a big thing, but I'll just try. I cannot do the work of a professor, but I'll just summarize and bring out some of the points. Currently, the rate of sea level rise is between 1.7 millimeter per year. For Lagos, sea level rise, the observation monthly mean between 1992 and 1994, it's more than 2.5 meter. Some of the primary causes of coastal erosion and sea level rise is melting ice, which results in increase in volume in the ocean. In the early 80s up to the early 90s, Lagos Bar Beach is one of the fastest eroding beach in the world, and this documentation is available. So the Alpha Beach, from the photographic evidence presented, you can see the effects between 2010 and 2012. The causes of coastal erosion are either anthropogenic or natural basis. The federal government over the years have spent huge amounts of money, and between 1974 to the year 2000, over 20 million cubic of sand has been tried to use to replenish the beach without any serious effort until the Lagos State government puts up the Eko Atlanticity project, which tried to put a little effort into it. Sea level impact on communities include loss of building, loss of lives, loss of habitat, and the health impact it also includes. So the impact is not only on Lagos, it's also along the coast of West Africa, and it is important for the state government to put in place a proper plan for the unavoidable or impacts sea level rise will have on it. Thank you, Madam, for the depth knowledge and for the presentation. I want to use this opportunity to thank participants who are joining us from different parts of the country and also outside the country. We have participants from the United States, we have participants from South Africa, from Netherlands, we have participants from Ghana, and we also have participants from Germany. Thank you all for joining us. Also, it is very, very important to acknowledge the presence of senior directors, both in Federal Ministry of Environment and in Lagos State. Also, we have permanent secretary, both retired and present permanent secretary in Lagos State. Thank you for joining us. We have environmental consultants, we have private individuals who are showing interest in helping to make Lagos better. Thank you all for joining us. Before we proceed, we'll take a little break, and after that, we go into the full panel session. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Welcome back, everyone. And we're moving now into the panel. Can I please ask Ma that you mute yourself? Thank you very much, Ma. So you're welcome back, everyone. And we're moving now into the panel session for today. And it's a pleasure to introduce to you the panelists for this session on the topic. Our first panelist is Professor Jimmy Adekunke. He is a tenured faculty member at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, where he is a chair of the Department of Geoscience, now Earth and Environmental Sciences, from 2008 to 2010. More recently, he served as a senior consultant with the Climate Change and Green Growth Department of the African Development Bank Group. He has served as executive director for various organizations, an award-winning climate scientist and globally recognized environmental leader whose work cuts across science, climate policy, environmental governance, and cross-institutional capacity building. His research has been funded by NASA, US National Science Foundation, and African Development Bank. His recent research focuses on societal impacts of environmental change, including air pollution studies in rapidly changing mid-latitude urban areas, water cycle processes in sub-Saharan Africa, and climate impacts on coastal ecosystems across multiple locations in Africa. Professor Adekunke sits on the multiple international science advisory boards and committee. It's a pleasure to have you, sir. Our second panel member for this evening is Dr. Olusegun Adiaga. He is a lecturer at the Department of Geography, University of Lagos, Nigeria. His field of specialty is in hydrology and water resource with focus on operational hydrology. Over the years, he has conducted research in urban hydrology, hydrology modeling, spatial hydrology, and climate change, amongst others. It's a pleasure to have you, sir. And Ma, you're our last panel member for this evening. So I'll move right into this session. May I please ask that the panel members turn on their cameras? Okay. Fantastic. I'm starting with Professor Adekunke. With what we've heard from Mrs. Molina's presentation. Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
How can I put on my camera?
So if you, hold on one second, sir. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, you should see your microphone and you should see your video. It's probably it has a red line across it. If you just click on that, that would help to enable your camera and that will turn it on.
Yeah, rocket.
Should I say that again, sir?
I'm not getting the video. I'm not getting the video, please.
Okay, not a problem. We can just continue without your video, sir. Since you're audible, that's fair enough. Professor Adekunke, sir, various coastal cities are developing coastal inundation maps. How do you believe that Lagos can prepare a coastal inundation map for emergency preparedness and response in the event of the worst case scenario? Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you for that question. But I think I first must acknowledge and commend Dr. Regina for Longshore for such an excellent presentation. Very detailed and just went right into the key issues with regards to the topic under consideration today. So thank you very much, Ma, for that tour de force of a presentation. I'm sure the audience has several questions to address and that you would be able to also help clarify. But speaking to the issue of inundation, there are a couple of things that are needed, but I think the very first is a very detailed base map, right, of infrastructure and resources. So in that coastal area. So there has to be, and I'm aware that the Lagos state government did invest at one point to create a fairly detailed map base for Lagos. I mean, the intent was mostly for, I think the driving force at that time was for tax generation, property tax assessment and generation. But once a map like that exists, a database exists, then you know what is where. You know what infrastructure is where. You know where. Once you have that, then the next step in an inundation process is to do use a coastal model to do some sort of a scenario-based analysis. Now that scenario-based analysis will be dependent on various assumptions of sea level rise, say for instance, based on projections, say climate projections. So you take the climate projections, connect them to this coastal models, and then you run scenarios, and that would then give you a sense of at a given level of sea level rise, these are the areas that will be inundated. These are the areas that will be impacted. And I think most coastal cities, most large coastal cities in the world have done this. And I believe that there have been some attempts, even in Lagos State, there to do some of this kind of work. But those are the key elements that you need to do. It's not a very difficult exercise to do anymore. The coastal models, they're very simple coastal models that even graduate students can use to do this. But the important thing is to have a reliable, spatially distributed database of infrastructure and physical resources within the coastal area. So that's how I will respond to that.
All right, thank you so much, sir. I come to you, Dr. Adiaga, with your expertise in hydrology. We already know that sea level rise, it would affect the aquifers. Are there any studies that you can share with us on the impact of sea level rise on coastal aquifers, and are these a potential threat to Lagos?
Well, thank you very much. Since it is very obvious that saltwater intrusion due to sea level rise will affect coastal aquifers. Going by the physical characteristics of Lagos being a low-lying region, there have been a lot of studies in this respect. One typical example, I can't recollect the year now, to be specific. There was a time that after the 7 days rain, the sea water passes through the lagoon system to get to the intake, to get to Lagos water intake. And for some days, people in Lagos were drinking salt water coming out from their taps. So, and looking at the rate at which it will be Lagos region will be very vulnerable to this as time goes on, because for now, nobody is monitoring the groundwater extraction. Almost every house has their own borehole without anybody really monitoring the depth. And that means that there is depletion of the groundwater level. And it implies that once there is, and that means that there will be a change in pressure. And once there is an increase in sea level, definitely, it will definitely flow into the freshwater aquifer. A lot of studies have been done on this, most especially around Surulere, around Victoria Island, and so on and so forth. And a particular example also, you can see it if you go towards Lekki, Ekwezo. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much, sir. I come to you, Dr. Folorunsho. From your presentation, it's evident, we know that this is happening. For a city like Lagos that has a growth rate of 6%, really high, how do you believe that we can incorporate prediction of sea level rise into urban planning and development in Lagos?
Thank you very much for the question. To predict sea level rise, you need tide gauges in a lot of places. The data is what you need, modeling, and then you come up with an understanding of what is going to happen. But the whole Lagos coastline, there is no tide gauge. There is no tide gauge. So I do not know how we can predict sea level, because the situation, the coastline, it's very volatile. Wherever you place a tide gauge, it's going to be swept by the storm surges. We have had 3 different tide gauges in the Nigerian Institute for Oceanography, and they've all been swept away by storm surges. However, we can use satellite information and model that. But then you need ground truthing, isn't it? You need to validate what the satellite information will be giving you. So I think it will be important for us Lagos State, to put in places, the tide gauge to give us some understanding and the way forward in terms of trying to model, how the sea levels will rise. Excellent, ma'am.
I stay on you again because of the response that you have provided. We need tide gauges. What immediate actions in the absence of the tide gauges, and if these are necessary for urban planning and development, what immediate actions do you then believe should help for the protection of the coastal areas? We already know that lots of communities, lots of people are already living along this coastline. What would be your advice on the immediate actions? Because climate change is happening, the effects are already happening. We're seeing it daily. They're already losing their livelihoods. What immediate actions do you believe we should prefer to these communities so that we save these lives and protect these communities? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. In the 1980s, there was an understanding by the federal government that people living along the coastline should observe the setback lines. Setback lines were like 200 meters away from the shoreline. That is, you cannot build any structure, very close to the shoreline. But this has been flaunted. People do not obey that. They have a lot of houses very close to the shore because all of a sudden there was this need to breathe fresh air from the coastline. And, because they build so close to the coastline, the ocean waves comes and erode fast those areas on the downdraft side. So people have to be, there has to be a new regulation, an enforceable regulation where people do not stay so close to the coastline. Because if eventually there are deaths, then this brings us to disasters. And if the Lagos State wants to avoid, disasters along the coastline, then they have to move people away from the shoreline. At least they should move away 500 meters away from the shoreline, because the rate at which the shoreline is eroding is so fast. So let's assume that you are 200 meters away from the shoreline and the rate of coastal erosion is like 40 meters per year. It means that less than 5 years, the waves will be breaking at your doorsteps. So you have to move further away from the shoreline than even what the government will, will enforce. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Professor Adekunke, I come to you now. Are there methodologies for quantifying the environmental impact arising from sea level rise and coastal erosion?
Yeah, very good question. Now those impacts, those environmental impacts are diverse. They're diverse. In fact, there's a question on the chat about the impact on ecosystems. So you can go all the way from salt intrusion and the impact on underground water resources, as my co-panelist mentioned earlier on. You can some of the studies that we've done using satellite information for that Lagos area and all the way to Niger Delta, for instance, looks at the impact on the erosion and accretion on the coast itself, which Dr. Florenshaw spoke about quite extensively today. Then one of my own personal interests, for instance, has been just the mangrove ecosystem within the Nigerian coastal belt, mostly in the Niger Delta, but we still have some in the Lagos area as well. So you have impacts on that as well, and then you have impact on marine fisheries, on fisheries and marine resources. So when you're looking at how do you assess environmental impact, it really depends on what you're doing, what your interest is. If you're interested in saltwater intrusion, for instance, the only way you can do that is in a very meaningful way, is to drill some test sites, right, along the coastlines. So you measure and you take samples, measure, and do laboratory analysis. If you're interested in say erosion and accretion on the coastline, you can do that with satellite information, because with time, and by doing time series of this high resolution assessments, you can get a sense of what is changing. And if you're a marine person, the methods for doing marine assessment and the impacts over time really involves going out and doing sampling as well. Population samples, and then we shouldn't forget that people live and depend on these coastal resources. So there are fishing communities spread all across, Lagos, the Lagos coastline. And we've just heard today, that in fact, some of these communities are variously just wiped out. So socioeconomic assessment of impact is also critical, is very important, because that's the only way we can get, and usually you do that through surveys. You go out, you do focus groups, you do interviews, and you do market economic analysis as well, to get a sense of how are these communities impacted, in all of this. So it's a range of tools and techniques that are available to us in the environmental field to do these assessments based on what our interest is.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Adiaga, I come over to you. My question to you is, what knowledge should professionals in the built environment acquire that can assist in developing sustainable cities that will cope to sea level rise and coastal erosion? Dr. Adiaga, are you there, sir?
I think we lost him. He's actually dropped off completely.
Okay, thank you very much, sir, for that. Dr. Folarunsho, I'd ask you, with many developments going on along the coastal area of Lagos, 2 new seaports, container terminals, how concerned should we be about the threats of the potential threats from sea level rise? I know your presentation did capture that, but in real terms, please tell us. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. We have a vulnerable coastline, and port development on the Barrier Lagoon should not be entertained by the government. The coastline is so vulnerable. The Lagos Babbage case is a typical example of what can happen if you go and construct another port anywhere on this Barrier Lagoon. Because when you do that, sediments are going to be, the downdrift side are going to be starved of sediment. It's a natural process. It means you're obstructing the natural process. And there is no way you can create an artificial process to replace the natural process. And especially, I have also mentioned that the Avon Canyon is within that axis. So why don't we integrate the various ports to just be situated at where we have ports? Or you go to a different morphological zone. The Barrier Lagoon is not for construction of anything. There is going to be a lot of problem downdrift. And what is also scary is that this whole process is going to continue and impact the Mahim Mud Coast. The Mahim Mud Coast is very close to the Barrier Lagoon system. The Mahim Mud Coast is a muddy terrain already with gamut of problems. So where are we going to go? I do not know. And the coastal communities, they will have nobody to assist them. They are, quite primary, or they are quite primitive. They do not understand anything, because now there is a desire to have private estates, protective coastlines. So the coastline is caged. People cannot even access it to know what is happening. The only thing you can do is to go to the downdrift side to see. But you see, we have to, the whole of the Nigerian coastline, it's not supposed to be privatized. Because if we do not know what is happening, the thing will come upon us. The required institutions should have access to measure up, to measure what is happening, to have data on what is happening. Other than that, we will all be lost, and what we fear most will come upon us. Thank you.
If I might jump in there to add a word to what Dr.
Absolutely, sir.
For Longshore said there. The concern that she raises is primary. It's important, and sometimes you ask, we ask ourselves that, you know, so why does government exist? So government exists to promote economic development. Yes, we accept that, we understand that, we know that. But equally important is the protection of the resource base that generates that economy. The protection of lives and property is just as important, if not even more important, than the economic imperatives. You know, so it seems to me that when we have to make a major economic concession to developers or to business people to do major infrastructure things, the kinds of expertise that you need to bring together, the voices that need to be around the table. So even if you must do it, I think it has, that's why we talk about integrated coastal management, right? You know, you just cannot be driven by the need to create a port for one particular purpose. And then you just head, you know, you put blinders on and then you just head down that road and just do that. You know, I think, you know, we have to have around the table, around those conversations, around those discussions, all of the other important voices in government, all the expertise that is required to look at the pros and the cons, the impact, so that even if you're going to go ahead and do it, you build in a process to mitigate some of the adverse effects of what some of these developments might do. So that's a really, really important point, especially when you are dealing with a system that is it's a very dynamic system. The coastline is a very, very dynamic system, and it's an integrated system, you know. So that's the point I wanted to add to that.
Thank you very much. Welcome back, Dr. Adiaga.
Thank you.
Professor Adekunke, thank you so much for throwing that in. I was about to get to how we can actually measure the socioeconomic impact of this, and I like that you've gone ahead to even speak about it. I'd quickly take a question from the Q&A section. Dede Olowokudejo says, coastal communities are told to prepare to adapt to future changes brought about by sea level rise and coastal erosion. What is the real meaning and full implication for this statement? And I'll give this question to Professor Adekunke because you've spoken about it. We know Jakarta is spending hundreds of billions of dollars to relocate their capital. Is that something that could happen to Lagos in some few years to come if nothing is done? And just looking at it from the socioeconomic impact, because we understand, you've rightly said it, that protecting the resources as much as protecting the economy. What do you have to say to this, sir?
Yeah, I think that's an important question. That's an important question. So there's some problems that you can fix by trying to solve the problem. There are some problems that you cannot fix because you don't even have a solution to the problem. So what you do is you accommodate the problem itself, or you give way, you know, you just find a way to live with it. Okay, or you don't even live with it. In the case of Jakarta, as you said, they've decided that, okay, we just have to relocate a substantial portion of our assets and our communities and our infrastructure. You know, that's adaptation. That's adaptation. And from everything that we know, the impacts of climate change will continue to accelerate. So I am, for instance, a climate scientist. So a lot of what I do is not the hard engineering stuff at all. I do more of the climate environmental aspects. So some of the studies we've done, even for Lagos State, indicate very clearly to us in our models, in the regional climate models that we use, that you're going to have this very intense storms, you know, that is difficult for us to manage now, you know, because of the weak infrastructure base. That even those intense storms are going to, they're going to get even more intense, you know, as we go into. How do you adapt to that? It's not something that we have the capacity to change. And I think it's a future that is staring, you know, that is staring us in the face. It's staring at us right in the face, and we're going right into it, you know. So adaptation, I would say, you know, we have to, of our coastal communities, is first of all, their current well-being, you know. How do we ensure that there is no significant erosion in well-being? And so if farmer is not farmers, well, there are farmers as well. Not a lot of farming gets done in Lagos State, but there are farming communities, mostly fishing communities. So how do we ensure that they can maintain a reasonable living standard, okay, in terms of their well-being, in terms of their just ability to take care of themselves and their families? So there's adaptation that could occur in that space in the short term. Then in the long term, you look at, you know, maybe what we have to do is begin to think about how you reestablish these communities much further from the coastline than where they are now, and then provide a way for them to still continue their fishing lifestyle, you know, that they know about. So it's a complicated problem, but it's one that needs to be addressed and can be addressed using multiple approaches. I'm sure Dr. Florenshaw has some thoughts around in this respect as well. But back to you, moderator.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir, for your insights. Dr. Adiaga, I come to you now. You're in the academia, well, you all are, but my specific question to you is, what I'm hearing is advocacy, information available. How do we make this research available in simple language for the common man, for information, consumption, and awareness creation? Because they are the ones who are most impacted. We need to get them to know about it. How do you think we can go about this? Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. To make the information available, it has a lot to do with information dissemination. And that means that there must be effort by the state government, probably to keep on organizing programs that will involve not only researchers, not only the community, but all stakeholders, like a competition, or they should be able to set up a kind of like the climate change office. The desk officer there should be able to organize competition among schools and raise issues up, research issues up that can encourage students to go into such research, and on sea level rise and climate change, adaptation, and so on and so forth. So at the end of the day, because the local knowledge still has a lot to do with how to manage this climate change and sea level rise situation. People have been adapting over the years. There are new scientific findings are out, and the usage of the tools are there. But the question is, maybe Lagos State should start with something. Let them have a detailed map, like Prof have said, about the risk that is at hand, about the communities about the stele itself, so that at the end of the day, if you go into such research, you will be able to drop such information at the DEX office, which the state can get access to and work on it. So thank you very much. And the media also has a lot to do with that. They should be able to launch out, meet communities, let there be stakeholders. Always let them have a stakeholder forum through which researchers can come and present their work, and people also can talk about their experiences over the years, and solutions can be provided. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. But what I wanted to highlight is the person who requires this information that we're talking about is not even in the room with us right now. The fisherman, the woman who is selling. How do we get this information to them? Because they're the ones who really need it. We need it as we're second-hand users of this information. The real people who need that information, they're not even sitting in the room with us. How do we get this information?
They have community development associations. They have forums through which they do meet as well. And we have government extension officers who can really pass this message in graphical terms to them. Government can even put up billboards around them. There was a time, Water Corporation put up a billboard where you see the water just running, and they'll say use water wisely. Such information can also be put in such communities, in a simple language that they will understand graphically, to understand what is happening, to see what is happening, and be able to know the message. And the extension officer has a lot to do, and they have a lot to do to meet this as their local associations as well. They have the local level, they have the way they organize themselves as well. So as a researcher, you might not be able to do such things, but the community extension officer will be able to direct and bring those youths to those grades of people to understand the message. Graphical message will go a long way within such community. So let the researchers do their work. Let them pass it to the government. Let government or NGOs put up graphical illustration of what is happening and be able to educate the local community. There are NGOs that do that a lot, and I'm very sure they do get to the local people to understand what is really going on.
Okay, thank you very much.
Madam Yawande, can I add to that, please?
Absolutely, ma'am.
Yes. You see, we should not be thinking that those living along the coastline are fisher folks only. We have educated people who have come to build 4-story buildings, hotels, resort here, their personal home, gigantic things. They are highly educated, but they have used to consult experts to advise them whether the location they chose to build those structures, it's okay. I had a guy who came to see me, but because we attended the same church, and he wanted me to access, his hotel, and it was right by the side of the beach. And I told him this hotel is going down. I just said it like that. He said, "Oh, is there nothing we can do? Maybe if we build wall here and there to protect it." I said, "No, even if you build wall, it makes it worse." You see, before they do anything on the coast, they better consult some experts. They should have some second information, whether the choices they are making are right. The local communities have to also be on the lookout. This is the time where everybody has to be concerned about his or her environment. The local community who cites a construction work or any protective structure on the updrift side, that is the left of his structure in the community, should raise an eyebrow and should go and question those people. They should know that, no, you can't do that. It will impact on my own structure. Everybody has to be, aware of his or her location. in this regard. Other than that, you'll be doing yourself a great harm.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am, for your comments. I just want to magnify the voices of our participants who have also joined. So I'll be taking a few comments. Engineer Hakim Ogubambi has a question and a comment, and I'll take both. His comment is Lagos needs to create a coastal zone management agency to handle issues related to the Lagos from storm surge or tidal flooding and erosion, shoreline modification and land management, model research and modeling studies, mitigation and adaptation measures. This agency will create policies and implementation procedures and programs. And his question is, the Lekki Peninsula is experiencing what Jakarta is going through, sinking. Lagos needs to validate this by carrying out frequent digital elevation modeling. The rise and unprecedented levels of flooding in Lekki Peninsula is an indication of a sinking city coupled with sea level rise, which does not allow for runoff discharge of inland water during heavy rainfall. Thank you very much, sir. I don't know if any of the panel members wants to take the question or if it feels like a comment to you. Any comments, reactions from the panel members about his comments? Okay, if none, I will take another question.
I think what's I don't think there was a question there. I think that was just a very well-informed comment, you know. Now was the question I think was he advocating for the creation of that coastal management agency, or does one already exist?
I think it's an advocate for the creation. We need to create.
Oh, it's long overdue. If one doesn't exist, then it's long overdue. And that would be a major recommendation of like a meeting like this for the existence of a coastal management agency in Lagos State. Absolutely critical. Because you know, the kinds of people who are going to that the exact kind of problem that Dr. Folorunsho mentioned just now, where people make decisions because they don't have the right information, and sometimes they don't even know where to go to get the right information. So land speculators come to them, they sell land, they purchase land, they develop it. All they're looking for is the economic aspects of it, the business side of it. So if you do have an agency, the agency then will be able to provide the kind of informed guidance, both for government and other types of investors, what needs to be done for orderly and perhaps even safer use of the coastal resource there. So excellent point that participant made.
Thank you, sir. A question here from Esther Omokwariola. What do you fear most will come upon us with the rising sea levels? Are you also saying that Eko Atlantic project is not a wise decision by the government? For Dr. Folorunsho, this is a targeted question.
Thank you for the question. It's a little bit dicey to double into, the Eko Atlantic project. The whole concept was to salvage the Bar Beach erosion, which the project did. So now we are not calculating or seeing, the intense wave approaching our doorsteps, because I also live there. However, anything you do on the beach will have a down effect, a down drift effect. So what Eko Atlantic started to do affected the Goshen estate. So they went and protected the Goshen estate. And that was what affected the Legusi estate. They went and created the Longshore Currents, and that also impacted the already eroding Alpha Beach. So everything is drifting downwards. I mean, I do not see how we can protect the whole of the Lagos coastline with a hard structure like a seawall. We can't. So there is, I mean, we have not yet started seeing, the total impact of the Eko Atlantic project. That's why I did not discuss it. So let us be hopeful that something better will come out, but I don't think so.
All right, thank you so much to all our participants. We're 5 minutes away from the top of the hour and we're supposed to end at 6. I just wanted to ask if you had any final comments that you wanted to leave with the audience. So I can start with Dr. Adiaga and Professor Adekunke, then Dr. Erosion. Order. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I'll do. Hello? Hello?
Can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. I think at this stage, there are two questions that we need to keep on asking ourselves. Are we ready to accommodate? Are we ready to retreat? Or are we ready to do a lot of avoidance? Because last speculators will always come around. People will always want to be by the beach, want to be by the sea side. So what are we trying to do? What is it has been said that we need an agency that will be able to provide information as to the risk area, as the avoidance of it, and the kind of structure that should be there and that we shouldn't be there. So I will want us to have a rethink, both the people and the government, about what we are launching ourselves to do. Protection, we know, has some side effect, most especially when it has to do with structural barriers. It has some strong effect as well. But are we going to keep accommodating? We are going to accommodate to what level? Are we going to go into retreat, and to what level are we going to go to avoidance? Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, what I will add to that is that the policy framework, right? The seriousness behind how government makes policies that work for everybody. Those policies should work for everybody. They should be comprehensive. They should work for everybody. They should protect communities. They should protect business. They should protect even government itself. The Lagos State government has serious investments and assets in that across the coastline. So that's an important aspect of this. I live in the US. Our coastal areas, they're always under threat, of either hurricanes or some form or one form of thing or the other. But what happens is that when you have a major disturbance, a major issue that causes a lot of destruction, within another year or two, they're able to rebuild back, and that is because you have risk management, you have insurance, you have instruments that allow for people to be able to rebuild, and so I think that the private sector also has a role here. Government steps in to provide relief and to provide help when things go wrong, but I think the insurance space is also one of those important areas that would help in risk management, because no matter whether you like it or not, because of the attraction of the coastline, people will always try to use the coastline. They will always try to do stuff on the coastline, and so how do we do it carefully? How do we do it sensibly? How do we do it with wisely. I think those are the types of things that we need to address together, with the government, of course, playing the lead and private sector playing their role as well. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, Prof has already said. I'm going to emphasize two areas. Number one, the Lagos State government, who is concerned about all the inhabitants in Lagos State, should target areas where they need to hear the truth about where they are living. For example, what's the name of this fast eroding beach that I showed? Alpha Beach. People in Alpha Beach should be told the truth that, see, this is the time you retreat. You just have to leave this area because it is not going to work. Those houses that are now currently facing the ocean are going to go down. The ones behind are going to follow. You better retreat. There is no way they are going to build any hard structure that will protect them. Number two, they have to increase or create the awareness of insurance schemes. People have to have insurance for their property along the coastline, because eventually when it goes down, they need a cushion effect. You see, these are hard facts that people don't want to hear, but that is what they need to hear right now in this era of higher sea levels. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you to all our panelists. We are very grateful and we're glad to have had you on this conversation. Thank you for joining. I hand over to Mr. Lasisi if he has any last comments before we move to the next section. Just a few more minutes and we'll be rounding up. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. We thank you for the panelists for their share of experience. And as a recap, we have a lot to take away as individual and also as government. Lagos need to have a base map and infrastructural database along the coastline. We need to start planning and doing scenario-based analysis. There is need for us to put in place groundwater extraction monitoring system. Presently, there are no tidal gates in the coastline of Lagos. So whether the federal government or the state government needs to put in place mechanism to have a tidal gauge for proper monitoring in the state. The Lagos State Fiscal Planning Regulation has a standard setback for building along the coastline. So why are we not enforcing these regulations? There is need for us to put in place the enforcement of this regulation. There are a lot of environmental impacts due to coastal erosion, seawater intrusion, marine assessment. So how do we do this? Most importantly, our takeaway is this: communities have been affected by coastal erosion. So let's do socioeconomic analysis to know how communities have been impacted. Also, one of the key takeaways for us today is Lagos needs to set up Coastal Zone Management Agency. We need to take our hands into ourselves. We cannot wait for federal government agency to plan for the state. So the state government needs to have a Coastal Zone Management Agency. Also, proper policy framework. We need to put in place proper policy framework that will be workable for both the citizen and also for government. Thank you all, our panelists, for the recommendation. We will try and compile this and forward to the necessary government agency before the end of the year. Thank you. Moderator, to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lasisi, for this recap. And just on a final note, we always announce winners at the end of the show, and we just want to announce the winners for our prizes for this edition. So these are winners for today, and you're winning a Russell Hub Ion. Please contact the host of the Eko EnviroTalk to reclaim your gifts. And thank you very much, everyone, for joining. We've come to the end of this session. It's been indeed a rich conversation. Please don't think that this is us preaching to the choir. It's not like that in any way. If you and I know the right things to do, change really does start from us. We think it's about the government, but you and I are part of the government. So this platform isn't created to preach to the choir. We are even part of the choir. We're different from the choir. So yeah, we've come to the end of this session. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and to all our participants who have always joined. We're deeply grateful for your contributions, and to our panel members, thank you very much. To everyone, thank you again for joining. Goodbye and enjoy your evening.
Thank you and bye-bye.
Thank you, our panelists, and thank you, everybody. We wish to see you October 1st when we have the 1st anniversary. No, we are through. We are through. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Yeah. Thank you, sir.
You can stop recording, sir.